lived in Kansas City. Was getting up in age, and my mother and her sister, Lena Brown, my mother being the youngest, and Lena's a little older than my mother, went up to check on him, and he was in the hospital, and they needed to make some decisions about what to do with Grandpa in terms of his living situation, his age, his health, and whether to bring him back to Tulsa and take care of him. So that's why they went up there. I'm going to read this, and this is something that she experienced while in Kansas City to see her grandfather. I'm sorry, her father, my grandfather, Leroy Eason. Willie come home. It was a hot and muggy day in July. My sister and I were in Wichita, Kansas to see about our father. You see, he was ill in St. Francis Hospital, not expected to live. Well, we'd been up at that hospital all day long. We left them and found a quiet place to eat, and then a motel nearby. The very thought of staying at my father's house was out of the question. Him being an old man and a bachelor too, he just couldn't keep his house up. So we decided to go over to his house the next day and clean it up. Meanwhile, after taking a shower and getting into bed, my sister turned the lamp off, and I said, I sure hope Daddy's better tomorrow. My sister said, me too. At that moment, we could hear an opening and slamming of these doors, and we were wondering what was going on. So I said to my sister, I wonder what the commotion is about outside. It seems like there's a lot of stuff going on with the doors. As we heard this car drive up, it had stopped quickly and the brakes were screeching. Then these doors opening and slamming shut, and two people running from the car. We could hear a woman's voice saying, Mona, don't do that. Don't beg. You're just lowering yourself. At that, the young girl seemed to jerk loose from the woman, but there was a shuffling of feet. She said, leave me alone. Just leave me alone. I gotta find him. The light from the neon sign across the street beamed off and on and through the semi-sheer drapes into the room. I looked at my sister and said, I wonder what was going on out there. She said, I don't know. We could hear the girl knocking frantically next door. Rap, 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 rap. Tapping on the door, hitting on the door real hard. Willie, she called out. Willie Brown, are you in there? A heavy voice answered her from behind the door and said, hey, lady, don't you know you're disturbing the peace? Ain't no Willie Brown here, just me and my lady. The young girl replied, I'm sorry, mister. I'm looking for my man. I just gotta find him. Then the steps were running closer and getting louder until knock, 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 knock. Rap, rap, rap on the door. Willie, come on out. Willie, I know you're there. My sister turned on the light. We looked at each other. I said, I feel so sorry for that child. I know what she must be going through. And my sister replied, me too. While putting on my robe, walking towards the door, I could hear the woman behind the young girl begging her to get back into the car. She seemed to be pulling her by the arm. I could hear a slight tussle, as she said, Mona, just look at you. Come on back home. Please come on back home and wait for Willie there. You're only looking for trouble. But Mona pulled away and fell across the door. Leave me alone. She began to cry. Before I could reach the door, she started knocking again. This time even harder. I took the night latch off and opened the door slightly. As I did, the light from inside fell across the young girl's tearful face. It cut me to my bones to see the hurt and love at the same time behind those dark, flooded eyes. As she looked at me, there was disappointment, or was it relief while looking over my shoulder into the room at my sister's bed. I'm sorry, there's no Willie here, only my sister and myself, I said. She replied, I'm sorry, but I gotta find Willie before it's too late. As her voice trailed off, she said, I love him so. I closed the door and stood there momentarily with my back to the door. She was lovely and so beautiful. It seems as if she was trying to find something that had been momentarily misplaced before being lost forever, or perhaps trying to catch something precious slipping away from her hand about to be broken. Off she goes again to the next door, knocking harder than ever. Bam, 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 knocking on the door. Willie, I know you're in there. Come on out and let's go home. She knocked persistently until it seemed by now her hand must surely be hurting. Please, Willie, come on home. From the sound of her voice, she must have sunk to her knees, crying and pressing against the door and knocking. Then suddenly, a voice was heard from behind the door. A man's voice, full of compassion and deep shame. Go home, Mona. Go home. At that, she burst into uncontrollable sobbing. Then we heard the sound of another car driving up, screeching its brakes, and footsteps of a man running. It must have been her brother, because he said, come on, sis, get up from there and get in the car. I'm taking you home. You're just making a fool of yourself. She didn't fight him. It was as though there was nothing left to fight for anymore. Next, we heard another woman say, I'm glad you came. I tried to keep her from doing this, but I just couldn't handle her. You take her home and I'll follow. The car doors slammed, the motors raced, and this car sped away into the night. You know, as I lay there in the silence of the dark room, I thought of the uncontrollable crying and hurt, and then what seemed to be defeat of the young girl. It was as though she had found what she had lost, only to find it too badly soiled or broken to repair. I wondered if she would ever be able to forgive and forget. Also, what about Willie, whom she so desperately wanted to come home? He didn't even so much as open the door. Was it because he couldn't face her? Or was it because he didn't want Mona to see the woman lying there beside him? Then there was a muffled voice from the next door and movement about the room. The door opened and closed as I heard the footsteps of a woman in high heels and the footsteps of a man close behind her. There was the squeaking sound of a car. door opening and slamming shut as the car and its passengers drove away into the night. Finally, drowsiness seemed to cover my eyes as I drifted into what seemed to be a peaceful, welcome sleep. That's the end of my story.